What's up, guys? We're here with a brand new video here on Frontline Archives. It's going to be a part of our History Teacher React series, in particular, our World War II playlist. Now, huge shout out to this YouTube channel, World War II, very fittingly named World War II, right? And they are fantastic. They have super in-depth videos covering a wide variety of topics from that time period, but they also have other series as well. In particular, I saw recently they're really diving into the Korean War. So if you're even remotely interested into that time period or anything related to World War II, like before, after, the consequences, what leads up to it, then you definitely need to check out this YouTube channel. Also, I think unfortunately one of their I guess co-host recently had a heart attack. He's doing well, but you know what? This is a good time to go ahead and support this channel, especially if you're into World War II. Now, before we kick off the video and really give our analysis and commentary, I do want to give a special shout out to my friend Javi, because he put me onto Firefox, and I had no idea Firefox had an ad blocker for YouTube. I'm over here, gullible, I guess. I just I just watch the ads. I'm a law-abiding citizen. Maybe it's the old age is getting to me. I'm considering myself pretty tech savvy, but apparently, I just went right over my head. Like my kids, they call me Unc. Javi calls me Unc. My younger friends call me Unc. That doesn't offend me. I'm an uncle. I got a nephew. Whatever. Don't get me fired up about that. Anyways, let's go and deep dive into this. It's about U-boats, Wolfpack killers, and talking about tactics, talking about what the British did to repel these attacks. And it's going to specialize in the first 2 years of the Battle of the Atlantic. And, maybe we can deep dive eventually into the last 2 years. And I'll have some statistics I can throw at you too, talking about the Battle of the Atlantic in its entirety. But let's go and jump into it. I'm excited. This is a part of history I've been really into lately. So maybe a little bit selfish of me to talk about this. But, if you're into history, you're kind of just into history. This is quite fascinating to me. So let's go ahead and jump into it.
Hidden beneath the deep blue waves of the Atlantic, clouded in the darkness of the night, acting as a lone wolf stalking its prey, sneaking into port, or strategically lined up along an expected convoy route to intercept any vessel that tries to supply Britain, the U-boat was Germany's premier weapon in their war on Allied shipping.
So, fun fact, U-boat in German, I don't speak German, Unterseeboot. Right? It makes sense. Like under the sea? I don't know, bro.
In the Battle of the Atlantic.
The Battle of the Atlantic refers to the main naval theater between Germany and the British.
Special episode on U-boat tactics, the first 2 years of the war. The Battle of the Atlantic, and specifically the German U-boat campaign to starve the British Isles, is
the first 2 years refers to 39 through 41.
It's a very dynamic one, characterized by innovations, counter moves, changing tactics, all with varying results. The submarine was already a menace back in the First World War, but then it was more of a novelty, though, mostly really usable to block ports or raid shipping in coastal areas. And even after that, the international restrictions put on submarines by the Treaty of Versailles and the London Naval Treaty of 1930, things like the invention of ASDIC, sonar, caused both the British and German admiralties to underestimate the submarine's potential.
Now, what he's talking about there, the Treaty of Versailles, let's start with that, talking about how this is product of Germany losing World War I. We're not going to get too into that because it's a whole different topic in itself. But the Treaty of Versailles sets up, in my opinion, quite a bit of World War II, because it puts Germany in this really, really weird space where they're kind of, I hate to almost say, like subservient to the winning side, which is the Entente and eventually the Allies. What does it do? Well, it puts heavy economic strain, political strain, and military strain on Germany in the form of reparations in modern times, about $400 billion worth of reparations to the victors. So that's economic. Takes away the Saarland, which is a big time industrial hub for Germany. Territorial, it takes away land. They have to get rid of all their colonial holdings. which in this modern times that sounds great because democracy, shouldn't have any colonies, but back then that was a big deal. Um, Militarily, they can only have a standing army of 100,000 men. They can't conscript men. Their navy is greatly reduced with no submarines, and their air force is non-existent. So this was very, very tough on the German people, which leaves the door wide open for a person like Hitler to come in with this fiery rhetoric who stokes the flames of almost like revolutionary ideals, but not necessarily like revolution within the country, although it was a cultural revolution, but more like, hey, these guys are the reason why we're living the way we are. Mass unemployment, hyperinflation, etc. So it was a big deal, to say the least. And he's talking about the London conference. That's talking about the restrictions on vessels, in particular, battleships, battle cruisers, stuff like that. There was I believe it was tonnage. If I could be wrong. You can only have X amount of tonnage, and this was to solidify Britain's hold on naval dominance, which is quite clever on the side of the British. But it doesn't last. Both of them don't last, obviously, which is what we'll get into.
A potential that is slow to manifest itself, as Germany's U-Boot-Waffe only has 25 ocean-worthy Type 7 subs at its disposal at the start of World War II. Senior submarine commander Karl Dönitz presses the German high...
Fun fact, Karl Dönitz ends up being the last official leader of the Nazi regime, the Nazi government. After Hitler does what he does, he puts Karl Dönitz in charge of Nazi Germany.
High command to prioritize construction of submarines over its surface fleet, claiming that he would only need 300 U-boats to starve Britain into submission. But Kriegsmarine commander Erich Raeder is more concerned with cruisers and battleships.
Now, Raeder actually ends up persuading Hitler to focus on the surface level ships because he kind of plays on Hitler's ego. And honestly, I feel like that would work on most people because when you're talking about naval dominance, in this time, most people thought it was the battleships, it was the big boys, it was the big guns and large surface fleets for blockading and shore bombardment and naval combat. But Karl Dönitz had a different idea. He recognized that the British Isles was an island nation, right? Quite a large one, but it was surrounded by water. So he said, let's starve them out. Let's see what we can do. Raeder was more in confrontational head-to-head, and that worked on Hitler originally because big boat, big guns seems sick, right? But this starts that inter-service rivalry between Raeder and Dönitz.
Still, in 1939, Dönitz's U-boats managed to sink 106 Allied ships, and the U-boat's potential becomes clear to everyone when Captain Gunther Prien and his U-47 sneak their way into the British naval base at Scapa Flow without being spotted in October 1939 and sink the battleship Royal Oak. Even while still not in great numbers.
So that was extremely impressive, obviously. U-boats, although they're capable, they're not necessarily, obviously I'm not a naval expert, but they're on paper, they're not necessarily supposed to be combating these larger ships. Now, that warship in Scapa Flow was a sitting duck. It was, that's when the ships are most vulnerable in port. So they recognized that it was more of a propaganda victory, like, oh, look, this little U-boat can take down this one of the British Navy's warships. But nonetheless, this was a sign of things to come and that the British needed to wake up to the U-boat threat.
The U-boats start to raid merchant shipping on the Atlantic. Their deployment is restricted at first, but unrestricted submarine warfare is effectively in place as of August 1940, though American ships are still officially off limits. U-boats usually approach a merchant ship submerged, checking for concealed weapons, torpedoes at the ready. When it is clear that the ship is unarmed, the sub surfaces and inspects the vessel's papers.
Now, two things. Unrestricted submarine warfare just refers to the fact if it's flying a British flag or an ally of the British, it's getting shot at. Secondly, American ships weren't particularly targeted around because they're not in the war officially. So they're just talking about This image is from 1943, but he just said 1939. The United States is not in the war yet, so Nazi Germany is not particularly looking to poke the bear. Right? They don't want to wake up the giant, at least not yet.
If the ship carries war-related cargo, it is sunk. This practice becomes more difficult when Britain develops a more effective convoy system. Merchants like tankers and freighters carrying oil, food, and weapons are now increasingly being escorted by a screen of warships. Destroyers, corvettes, minesweepers, whatever they can get their hands on, really. These escorts are often equipped with sonar, which can detect submerged U-boats approaching the convoys, allowing the surface ships to neutralize them with depth charges. However,
Depth charges are pretty interesting and they're quite sinister, honestly. Like the name suggests, if you suspect a U-boat underneath you or submerged, you drop these depth charges, which are supposed to explode at a certain depth, which you can obviously gauge. So if you think if the U-boat's underneath you, you gauge the depth, drop the charge, and they blow up underwater. Now they weren't really meant for direct hits, but the shock wave is supposed to disrupt hull integrity, potentially incapacitate crew, or force the ship to peel off because of damages, which is interesting.
some early U-boat aces of the Kriegsmarine develop a strategy to deal with sonar. Don't submerge. Captains like Otto Kretschmer used the U-boat's low conning tower, high surface speed.
This only works initially.
And most importantly, the enemy's focus on looking for submerged submarines. They remain surfaced, slip through the screen of escorts at nighttime, and pick off merchant vessels from the middle of the convoy.
It's also important to note that submarines or submersibles at this time aren't how they are in modern times. You have these nuclear submarines that can be submerged for X amount of times, months on end almost. Back then, they had to surface for air, for charging their batteries. They had diesel engines, so you don't want to run that thing underwater. What they did when they submerged, they were running primarily on battery, but when they had to come up to the surface to recharge, so they would travel in predominantly at night to potentially get ahead of these convoys or to intercept them. And then when it came time to attack, battle stations, that's when they submerged. So a common misconception, submarine just means they're under the water creeping. Eventually Germany develops technology that they can be submerged for quite a long time, but initially that wasn't the case. So something to note.
While escorts are still looking for the attacker below the waterline, the U-boat can hit multiple targets with its torpedoes and deck gun before slipping out of the convoy, often still unseen. Kretschmer reports his U-boat tactics to headquarters, which include efficient lookouts are of prime importance. Lone ships should be attacked on the surface with gunfire in order to save expensive torpedoes, and once the attack is launched, do not submerge except in circumstances of dire necessity. Remember that on the surface, it is easier for you to spot the enemy than for the enemy to spot you. We have put all 11 points in the pinned comment under this video. Anyhow, this strategy proves quite deadly, like when convoy HX-72 is sighted by Prinz Sub, which together with 4 other U-boats in the area engaged the convoy, sinking 11 ships totaling 72,700 tons.
Now, he puts the tons up there because the Battle of the Atlantic is noted as the tonnage war. Because when you talk about industrial capacity, industrial power, the goal of the Kriegsmarine here is to not only starve Britain, literally, because if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but 70% of British food is imported at this time, along with other war material. So, yes, it's a big part of it, but also you want to incapacitate, you want to destroy the British ability to put ships in the water. So that's their main goal, sink tonnage as much as you can. And the British recognize this, so they just ramp up production. And when the United States comes in, that just skyrockets. It gets to the point where the Kriegsmarine, on paper, statistically, just have no chance of ever sinking enough ships. So their efforts are futile.
When 20 out of 35 ships of SC-7 are sunk in October 1940. That year, 492 cargo ships are sunk, totaling roughly 2.37 million tons for the loss of 26 U-boats. The German sailors call
Good
this
ratio.
the happy time. The time in which
This is
the
the
German
first happy
U-boat
time.
ace is
There's
the
two of
king
them,
of the high seas
according to
and
historians.
the star of the propaganda press back home. But all things come to an end. For the happy time, this is the spring of 1941, when new Allied anti-submarine warfare measures seemed to turn the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. In March 1941, in a span of 10 days, 3 of Germany's top U-boat aces, Günther Prien, Joachim Schepke, and Otto Kretschmer, are captured or killed. New technological innovations make the detection of U-boats easier. The increasing availability of surface radar offsets the surface invisibility at night, and a new machine called HFDF, or HuffDuff, allows convoys to calculate the bearing and later plot the location of U-boats based on their outgoing and incoming radio traffic. Further,
Now, remember, as discussed in our previous episode in our World War II playlist, the Americans and the British share this technology predominantly. So when the Americans enter the war, they're right there with them, and so they can really combat these U-boats.
furthermore, the destroyers for bases deal
Unterseeboats.
brings the British 50 old American destroyers, which allows for a larger range of cover.
So he's talking about destroyers for bases. The United States made an agreement with the British government to, like the name suggests, trade destroyers, which are used for screening these convoy and commerce vessels and escort them for bases. So one of those things that FDR could get away with without full on, giving something away or having them buy it off the Americans. There's monetary exchange, like land for, convoys, which at this time, the American government wasn't too particularly fond. They were very much isolationist. They weren't down with it. Even if FDR said, like, let's go to war tomorrow. Remember, in the United States government, separation of powers, Congress must declare war. The president, the executive branch, is in charge of the military. So his hands are tied.
Another major blow to the Germans, though they don't know it, is the capture of an Enigma machine in May 1941, allowing the Allies to listen to and eventually decrypt encrypted communications between the U-boats and their headquarters in France.
Code breaking, espionage, the British were very, very good at. They excelled in this category. That's a whole different, beast in itself. You really want to get into code breaking or breaking the Enigma or espionage. Maybe in the future we can get into that. But very important. The British did, they did a lot of work in that particular area.
Enigma is the name of the code used. But rather than help to deter or fend off U-boat attacks, these changes really mean that most U-boats can be evaded altogether. See, it's easier for one big convoy to slip through German patrols unseen than it is for 20 lone ships.
Right.
And if the location of a U-boat is discovered through the deciphering of communications with Enigma, the convoy can just change course to avoid running into the U-boat.
And that was a strategy. It went from, maybe merchant ships going through their business as if everything's, normal. But during this wartime, the British got pretty smart in the Royal Navy. They're like, let's go ahead and consolidate, have these individual time windows that we can escort these merchant sailors. Now, I saw something recently. Sarah Payne, my favorite lecturer. If you watched my last video, I talked about her. She was talking about how this wasn't seen as a glamorous, task. Like the men at the time, the Navy men at the time, were very much macho and they wanted to go, naval combat. They didn't enjoy escorting, which is interesting and it makes sense. But it was a big part of the war effort. If there was not escorts, who knows? Potentially Britain could have starved. But I'm not big on hypotheticals. We already talked about that.
Together with the measures that make it much more dangerous for a lone U-boat to attack an escorted convoy, these new developments mean the Germans must find a new group-oriented raiding strategy. Group tactics were already used in 1939, but that was highly uncoordinated, and multiple U-boats might have been ordered to attack the same target by high command without communicating amongst themselves. This is how Kretschmer and his compatriots operated. New tactics of coordinated group attacks are called Wolfpack tactics or Rudeltaktik, and were theorized already back in the 1920s. Dönitz particularly likes this and applies it to his vision for the U-Boot-Waffe. The idea is for multiple subs to patrol one stretch of sea in a long line at a slow speed with double the visibility range in between the vessels, roughly 10 miles, allowing the boats to easily spot and intercept convoys. In practice, poor visibility on the often rough Atlantic allows many ships to slip through. But the increase of the number of U-boats at Dönitz's disposal allows for the improvement of this tactic.
So it's almost like combing the desert, right? I don't know if y'all ever seen Spaceballs before. Kind of a silly movie reference, but they go out there combing the desert, get the comb, or whatever. But they're combing the sea, right? They're in these lines parallel to each other. He said 10 miles. I didn't know that, and it's the first time hearing that. It's quite interesting. And they spot a convoy. They communicate through these Enigma machines, which were being cracked by the British government, but it still took time, right? And they would converge on that one centralized location and obviously fire off their torpedoes. It got to the point, though, where the British understood what was going on. They cracked the Enigma machine through espionage, through capturing U-boats that weren't scuttled. And funny enough, the Nazis catch onto this and add an extra rotor to the Enigma machine. Whatever. There's a whole thing about that. But this Wolfpack tactic was quite efficient, at least to start.
In what are called fast patrol lines, where multiple lines of 15 or so U-boats patrol a stretch of ocean at a high speed. The use of long-range hydrophones allows the crews to pick up propeller noises of inbound ships. Furthermore,
that's crazy.
The German B-Dienst Naval Intelligence Service has cracked a British naval code allowing them to predict the route of incoming convoys. This has deadly consequences, like on September 9th, 1941, when slow convoy 42 is spotted by a sub in a Wolfpack. The group infiltrates the convoy and unleashes its torpedoes on the convoy, sinking 16 of 70 ships over 3 nights. But the glory days of the Wolfpack are still to come. In November 1941, the Kriegsmarine has just over 50 submarines patrolling the seas at one time. In a year, that number will be doubled. We will do another special on U-boat tactics later in the war, as the race of U-boat innovations and countermeasures develops. What is certain, though, is that the Battle of the Atlantic and the ingenuity with which both sides are fighting it will only escalate, and the involvement of the United States is already increasing in the fall of 1941. American ships are now escorting Allied convoys as far as Greenland. Should the U.S. actively join the war against Germany, the battle in the Atlantic may go into overdrive.
Well, obviously, hindsight's 2020. We know what happens in Pearl Harbor. We know what that the Japanese surprise attack. They declare war. Germany follows soon thereafter. So the Battle Atlantic. This is the first 2 years. It gets pretty intense, obviously. But I will say this: that's the first happy time. The second happy time refers to when the Americans join, and it's not necessarily because the U-boats got that much more efficient. It's just there was more targets. Right, when you got Americans and British merchant ships, they were just firing like crazy. But the countermeasures go insane. You got the sonar, you got the radar, you got the overlapping air zones over the Atlantic. And remember, these are semi-submersible ships, right? They're almost like a boat that can go underwater, not necessarily like a modern-day submarine. So they're able to be spotted through radar and through aerial, bombardment, so to speak. Like they can be attacked. So the happy times end. Obviously, the British and the American might together, industrial might plus the countermeasures, U-boats fall off a cliff eventually. But it's quite interesting. Some statistics for y'all real quick. Being a U-boat, commander or, operator was not a good place to be. All right. In 1945, the survival rate, so the end of the war, was about 7 or 8% of U-boat individuals who were there operating them survived. That's not a good place to be. So it really shows you as the years progress, the countermeasures, the coordination, the Enigma machine being cracked, the overlapping air zones. It was just too much. On top of the fact that even if they could potentially have these same numbers of sinking convoys, the Americans and British were just making far, far too much. But it's an interesting point of history because they got not necessarily close, but they were on the right track. The Nazis were, and starving Britain was a real threat. And if not mistaken, Churchill even said the one thing that kept him up at night was the U-boat threat, which speaks volumes because obviously London was being bombed. You know, there was a whole continental war going on, and he says that the U-boats was what frightened him the most. So quite interesting stuff, guys. Really appreciate y'all stopping by. I can't thank y'all enough for the support that's been coming my way. All my friends, I'm very blessed. I'm very fortunate, very grateful to have a fantastic support system like y'all guys. And if you're interested in World War II history or just history in general, please feel free to comment, like, subscribe. I really appreciate y'all guys. Until next time, look out for a new Texas history video sometime later this week, and then we'll probably jump back into World War II next week, guys. Really appreciate it. Peace out.